So thank you for everybody joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we will start. Wrong screen. Sorry. Try again. There we go. Does everybody see my screen okay? Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. So we're with American Muslim Community Foundation, so we're happy to have you. Today we'll be doing one of our social impact accelerators, one of our educational webinars. So it's a series of monthly webinars. Today will be nonprofit compliance, the basics of nonprofit compliance with Sufia, Khalid, Khan, and Saleem, the amazing Muslim Legal Fund of America legal team. Brief agenda, the welcome and intro, speaker information, presentation, Q&A, and upcoming events. A little about AMCF is our vision, our mission, and core values. We're just going to leave it up on the screen and keep on moving. We have programs for donors and nonprofits, centering on donor advised funds, giving circles, endowments, and leadership development. We do have a nonprofit resource center with a curated list of resources we'd encourage you to check out at your leisure. We also have Muslim Women's Giving Circle, which we're a part of today. Harnessing the power of American Muslim women through collective giving, combining and democratizing our giving, amplifying women-focused nonprofits, supporting Muslim women leadership, and providing seamless donations to organizations chosen by our members. So simple model, you join at the amount of any amount, $35 or more, become a voting member. You then nominate. All members get a chance to nominate a nonprofit, and the voting members get a vote and choose the top 3 organizations that will be funded. It's unrestricted funds, either in the form of an endowment or grants. Over the past 6 years, we have supported 6 nonprofits with $41,000, which has been collectively raised and distributed. A huge thank you to our members. Last year, the Muslim Legal Fund of America, we were honored to award them $7,500. Olive Community Services, $4,500, and Pillars of Peace, $3,000. So honored. A couple upcoming programs. We do have a members-only salon next week for professional networking, really giving a space for Muslim women in leadership, a safe space to connect, mentor, ask questions. Next month, our educational webinar will be with Mohsen, talking with Juhi Dahar, the co-founder and ED, bringing accessibility to our spaces. And we will also have ASL interpreters provided by Mohsen for this webinar. And on May 29th, we'll have our next member-only salon. So encourage you to check out the Giving Circle, join and support American Muslim women. And now we're honored to have the Muslim Legal Fund of America, our 2024 Women's Giving Circle grantee, do nonprofit compliance. Actually, it's part 2, basics of nonprofit compliance. Sufia Khalid, Khan, and Sana Saleem will be joining us today. And I will turn it over to you guys, you lovely ladies.
Thank you so much to AMCF for hosting.
Sana, I think you froze.
Uh-oh. Hello.
Now there, you're back.
Sorry. So last week, Sufia was talking about kind of international giving and OFAC compliance. She talked about material support to terrorism laws. This week, we are talking about nonprofit compliance. So we're kind of taking a step back from what Sufia was talking about and really focusing on the internal workings of your organization. Nonprofit compliance has always been important, at least to MLFA. And I think now with kind of today's political climate, with the potential of HR 9495, we appreciate that others are appreciating the importance of it as well. And so with that, I will share my screen. And hopefully, and I started off. Oh, okay. Can you all see that? Yes, good. Okay, great. So just a quick little background. I am the nonprofit governance department program manager and staff attorney here at MLFA. I've been with MLFA since just before October 7th of 2023. I started at the end of September and kind of hit the ground running with all of it. So alhamdulillah, excited to be here. Before MLFA, I was with Indiana University. MLFA is based in Dallas. I myself am based in Indiana. I was with Indiana University because MLFA had given Indiana University a grant to do this exact work, nonprofit governance, risk compliance, legal screenings. So that is a service that we offer at MLFA for any organization interested. You have just go on our website, fill out our form. I don't know, Huma, if you can put the link in the chat real quick. We ask organizations to fill out an intake form. We receive that form and we provide a governance, risk compliance, legal screening, which reviews internal documents of an organization. So our presentation today is very much based on that service that we provide. Today's information is very much general. It is not to be construed as legal advice. At the end, if you have any questions, please refrain from disclosing any confidential information specific to your organization. Feel free to email us if you have specific questions or go through the intake process and then we can complete a full legal screening for your organization. So our legal screenings really look at these 4 areas. We look at regulatory compliance, so that's like state and federal. This is almost the easiest of the categories that we look at because it's a little bit more black and white. Are you filing the things that you need to be filing, or are you not? Are you kind of in compliance with the state and federal laws? We look at governance, which talks about your board roles and responsibilities, the board meetings, how the organization is kind of run, who runs the organization. We also look, third category is controls, which is another way of saying like your handbook and policies. And then we also look at your financials. And this is exactly the setup that we have for our legal screenings for our clients as well, as far as the breakdown of the categories that we look at. I am going to start with the first 2 categories, and then Homa will round us out at the end with those last 2 categories. So starting off with regulatory compliance, like I said, state compliance and federal compliance are kind of the 2 main buckets that fall in this realm that we're looking at. So state compliance, have you completed your... So first of all, I guess I should back up and say any organization that is looking to get started, if you have not yet started or if you don't yet have your 501c3 status, you're going to file with your state first. So you go to your state, Secretary of State website. Sometimes it's the Attorney General's website. And generally they have you fill out and file with them in articles of incorporation. And then, certain annual reports and annual filings. So that's the first thing. Once you receive that, usually it's pretty fast turnaround time. We've seen, anywhere from like, I don't know, maybe 48 hours or so. It's a pretty quick turnaround time from the state that you get an approval letter saying that, okay, your organization is registered in the state. From there, you have to, and I don't know if I'm skipping ahead. From there, you have to, you have 27 months to then file a IRS form 1023, which is the form asking the IRS to give your organization tax exempt status. That's that 501c3 status, which gives your donors a tax exemption when they donate to your organization. But going back to the state compliance, some states heavily regulate nonprofits. California comes to mind when I think of which states are a little bit more heavily regulated. So it's really important to find a specific attorney specific to your state when it comes to getting that paperwork filed and processed. So you'll get an EIN number, and that's like your corporate social security number. That is the end all be all number for anything kind of nonprofit related. And generally, you will also have to file an annual report with your state to make sure that you're in good standing with your Secretary of State. And that those reports generally contain basic information like the company's address, registered agent, officers, directors, that can be updated and amended. So one of the things that we recommend in our screening is to come up with a policy where your board of directors is reviewing all of your information anywhere from every 3 years or so, I think is a good number, but anywhere from 3 to 5 years, your organization should probably be reviewing all of these initial filings to make sure they're still up to date, that the registered agent is still correct, addresses are all still correct. There are some states that do not require this annual filing, but for the most part, most states do. There is a penalty for failing to file your annual report, and that usually results in the dissolution of your nonprofit corporation. So continuing on, charitable solicitation is one of kind of the most common things I'd say that we see in our legal screenings that organizations are not doing. And it's something that is kind of an easy target, I'd say, for a government to pinpoint an organization or to flag an organization that is not doing this. I've actually done several webinars just on this topic, and it's really detailed there. So just generally what's on the slide, 40 of 50 states require that most organizations, not even all, but most organizations be registered with the state's charitable solicitation compliance body. And that's, again, sometimes it's the AG's office, sometimes it's another office. Prior to soliciting donations. Now, there's a specific definition of what does solicitation mean, and that's asking, right? So it's direct mailers to anyone, right? Anything that you send in the mail, it's direct phone calls, it's emails soliciting, asking for money, and it's text messages, anything like the WhatsApp, right? Anything like that. A question that we often get, and that doesn't actually have like a really direct answer, but from all of the IRS kind of guidance and things that we've read, the question is, what about the Donate Now button on our website? Is that solicitation? And I think Huma can back me up on this when I say, according to this definition, that Donate Now button doesn't necessarily, fall under the definition of solicitation because you're not directly seeking or asking for funds. People go to your website and they can click on the Donate Now button, which is different than you proactively sending out a mailer or phone call or email. But I'll leave it at that because in the interest of time, but there are several companies actually that just do this for organizations. They're not necessarily lawyers, but depending on the size of your organization and what your budget is, how much money you want to spend, in theory, it doesn't matter if you collect $5 or $50,000 from a state, whether or not you're located there, you could be on the hook for not failing to file your charitable solicitation registration for that state. So some larger organizations may be extra risk averse and get this registration in the 40 out of 50 states that require it. And some organizations that might be okay with a little bit more risk may not file it, but I would definitely seek out help from one of those companies that there's several. Harbor Compliance and Cogency Agency is one of, anyways, there's a bunch. We can, if anyone is interested, we can give out some names of companies that just do this. It requires a lot of paperwork. It requires annual like renewals and things like that. So just be aware that this is something that, depending on how large your organization is and how much you solicit from different states around the country, that this is something that you should be doing. So then we get to the federal compliance. I kind of gave you a little preview in one of the previous slides about how, so once you do your state registration, you have 27 months to then file your initial 1023 that contains the correct purpose that your organization, purpose can be anything from, religious, charitable, scientific, literary, educational. So you have I don't know if it's as simple as a drop-down menu, but you have those kind of choices that you choose from about what your organization is going to be. And the reason that that's important is, I mean, there's several reasons it's important, but is number one, is your purpose consistently stated across all of your governing documents? So your articles of incorporation, your bylaws, your Form 1023, and then has your organization's purpose or activities materially changed since first applying for tax exempt status? Now that's, I think, the probably most important part of this is making sure that that purpose has not changed or jumped from religious to charitable or charitable to educational, because that's something that the government can and the IRS can and does look at via your annual 990s. So and it's okay if it does change later on in 5-10 years, your goals change, but then you have to make sure to go back and amend any documents that need to be amended to reflect that change. Let's see. I think that's it for this slide, so I will move on. So you heard me mention the 990. The IRS requires most 501c3 tax-exempt organizations to file annual returns, annual informational returns, and that is called the 990. There's a few different versions of it based on the organization's annual revenue, as you can see here. The like churches and mosques, for example, are not required to file 990s. For the most part, all other organizations are. So it requests information about revenue, expenditure, income data, donor data, among some other information, but that's the 990 in a nutshell. Oops, sorry. So then I'll move on to our governance section that we talk about in our legal screenings as well. And this is, again, very much an overview and a summary of the things we look at. So let me just, oops. When we talk about governance, we're looking at board composition, like I mentioned, board roles and responsibilities, the fiduciary duty of the board, any actions taken by the board, meeting minutes, conflict of interest policy, board compensation. So I'm kind of going to go through these. So board composition, the IRS requires C3s to have an independent board of directors. Independent directors are those that do not receive compensation from the board, either as staff or as independent contractors, and don't engage in transactions either personally or through any of their controlled entities with the nonprofit and any related organizations exceeding $10,000. So both of these rules apply to the directors themselves and their family members. A director's spouse or child, if a director's spouse or child is an employee of the organization, that director is no longer considered independent for this rule. And a majority of the board should not be related by blood or marriage. So keep that in mind when either forming an organization or when there's like a transition, if you have elections and things like that with your board. Another thing that we want to talk about is board controlled versus member controlled. So in a board controlled structure, the board of directors holds the primary governance responsibility. They take the organization in the direction that they want it to go. They make decisions, they oversee operations. In a member controlled structure, the members, these are like formal members with voting rights, have the power to elect or appoint board members, and they may also influence governance decisions. So essentially members kind of guide the board and tell the board what the members want the board to do. A board, and there's no right or wrong. A board controlled structure might be more suitable if an organization wants the board to retain more control, while member controlled structure may be preferred if the organization wants to empower members, get more activity and involvement from the members, and involve them in the governance decisions. Number of board members, usually, I will say, I'm not going to say across the board, but usually it's 3. You need 3 members, except California requires 1. So you have to check what your state requires. And how many you need, we get this question a lot, really depends on your organization's needs, the programming needs, the size of your organization. So usually states don't have a required number of board members. Usually odd numbers, I'd say anywhere from I don't know, 7 or 9. I've seen up to 11, 13, depending on how large the organization is, and the kind of programming that they're doing. Fiduciary duty is a big one, and I think that's one thing that a lot of board members either are not necessarily told, or it's not focused. There's no focus on it, and I think it is really important, because this is a board member, whether you're a volunteer or not. Like a board member is legally obligated to act in the best interest of the organization. You have a duty of trust and a duty of loyalty, and this means that I'm not going to read everything on that list, but just acting in the best interest of the organization. So one of the primary responsibilities is kind of that fiduciary duty, and it's to maintain the fiduciary integrity, financial integrity of the organizations. Board members act as trustees of the organization's assets and must exercise due diligence and oversight to ensure that the nonprofit is well managed and that its financial status remains sound. So, and we'll get into kind of conflict of interest later on too, but that also kind of goes hand in hand, that you can't, it might be unethical for a board member to, funnel business to his own private, business, and not disclose that information. So we'll get into that a little bit later, but fiduciary duty requires board members to stay objective, unselfish, responsible, honest, trustworthy. Board members are stewards of public trust, right? You're getting this donation money for and being trusted by the donors to take care of that money. And as Muslims, it's an amana from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we take care of that as well. So just always act in the best interest of the organization. Okay, only a couple more slides, and then I'm going to hand it over to Huma. So governance meeting minutes. This is another thing that I actually really focus on. It's something so small, or seemingly so small, but governance, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Just to back up about attendance for meetings. So on average, 90% of directors should attend, or board of directors should attend board meetings. And if the board fails to reach this benchmark or can't always achieve a quorum, it really should look at board member attendance and potentially remove board members who do not attend meetings, because then you're not fulfilling your fiduciary duties, and that really is incumbent to the organization's success. And some organizations have provisions that if board members miss a certain number of meetings in a row, or within a certain 12-month period, 18-month period, they're automatically removed. Obviously, that's up to each organization, but definitely keep that in mind. And I also understand sometimes it's a struggle to find board members, and so you kind of have to find a balance between finding board members, retaining board members, and kind of promoting active board members. So getting to meeting minutes for nonprofits. To document the history of board's actions and serve as a legal record in the event of litigation, regulatory investigations like the IRS or Attorney General. For minutes are crucial evidence that the board actions were properly taken. One thing that we always advise clients is that you don't want to be overly specific. Excuse me. You don't want to be overly specific in your meeting minutes. Really, it's just to kind of transcribe decisions that have been made. You don't need to get into why the decision was made, or who voted yes and who voted no, and what the arguments were. Just kind of transcribe the decision that happened, because they can be used in any type of action. I'm so sorry. And then they do have to be prepared contemporaneously. So usually secretary will be typing out the meeting minutes during the meeting, and then later on we'll send them out for everyone's approval. Sometimes that happens at the next board meeting, or it can happen before the next board meeting. So that's why contemporaneous usually means around 60 days between, from that meeting, 60 days out, or before the next board meeting. Okay, so here we get to conflicts of interest, and a conflict of interest occurs when a person, I should say, the board of director employee could financially benefit from a transaction that the organization is intending to engage in. So this was kind of that example that I gave. if a board member has their own personal business, that they are, pushing the organization to hire them to do a painting job on the building, or if they have a restaurant and they want the organization to cater food from their restaurant, it's not allowed, but it has to be disclosed. So conflict of interest policy should require that person to disclose the existence of a conflict and prohibit that interested party from voting on that matter, and then prohibit that interested party from being present when the rest of the board discusses whether they will enter into that transaction. IRS strongly recommends, does not require, but strongly recommends a conflict of interest policy. This is easily what the, probably number one best practice that we can emphasize. Number two would probably be having a whistleblower policy. Both of those are asked about in the 1023 and the annual 990. Does your organization have a conflict of interest? Yes or no? Again, it's not required, but it is highly recommended. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Huma, who will share her screen.
Assalamualaikum, everyone. Thank you, Sana. I am going to go ahead and attempt this. Can everybody see the slides? All right, excellent. So let me actually go to the right slide. So the slide that I'm going to start with is the idea of controls. Controls are generally the internal policies that you have in place that govern your organization and how it actually does things internally. Having policies in place that everybody is trained on and understands how to use is actually very critical when it comes to making sure that you are compliant and doing everything the way you're supposed to be doing. So some common policies would be like a donor policy, a conflict of interest policy, a whistleblower policy for some larger organizations and even mid-sized organizations, an investment policy. If you're doing any foreign grant work, a foreign grant policy. And it's critical to show in the event that you are audited that you have these policies in place and people are trained on them and they actually use them in the day-to-day, how they run things, how they document things. So they're actually really critical. So a donor policy, which is where I'll start, is basically a policy that says when you get a donation, how are you documenting where that came from? So you need to, every organization should know who that donor is. You need to make sure you have a policy that states that you should be collecting donor identification data, how much that donation was, whether it was an in-kind donation, like for example, a donor donated the food for an event as opposed to giving funds. And then it should lay out the grounds for rejecting a donation. So for example, if you're receiving foreign donations, it's imperative that you know who the donor is and don't just accept donations from any foreign individual or entity, but actually be aware of who those individuals or entities are. So having a robust donor policy in place that everybody's aware of, and then having a system in place behind that donor policy that implements those things is actually really critical. A conflict of interest policy, Sana covered this, so I won't cover it, but just as a thing, the IRS actually does ask on that 1023 application and on your 990 whether you have actually a conflict of interest policy in place and a whistleblower policy in place. So they want to see those policies are in place and they are being utilized when needed. right. Just in the interest of time, because I want to make sure we do have time for questions. Having employee, volunteer, volunteer policies and handbooks in place. If you are run entirely by volunteers and you don't have employees, having an employee or volunteer policy handbook is critical so that you can maintain as an organization control over the way those individuals behave at events, the way they make the organization look in a public setting. That you want to make sure all volunteers understand the message and the purpose of the organization so that there is consistency in everything that's done. So because organizations often use volunteers to carry out these things, it becomes really essential to have policies and handbooks in place that volunteers are aware of, have volunteer agreements in place that volunteers actually sign. And then in case of really specialized volunteer work, so for example, organizations that do medical aid of some kind actually have that volunteer would need to prove that they are certified in their particular field and have the proper licenses to function. And then you are also training your volunteers to maintain certain behavioral expectations throughout as they conduct their volunteer work. So having an employee and volunteer handbook in place is actually one that is used is actually very, very important. Okay, foreign grants. So this is something Sufia actually talked about, and it's having a physical policy in place if you are doing any kind of foreign grant work. So the United States has a massive sanctions regime, and that regime is not negotiable. You can't ignore it when doing work in conflict zones. So OFAC is the entity that kind of runs the entire U.S. sanctions regime. And sanctions can be against countries, sanctions can be against entire regions, sanctions can be against specific state actors and even individuals. And so right now the OFAC sanctions list has over 10,000 individuals and entities on it. So if an organization is doing any kind of foreign grant work, there needs to be a policy in place that states how do you as an organization vet those people that you are partnering with that are outside of the US in these conflict zones, in these areas and regions that are under US sanctions. And so you have to have a policy that says, okay, we check the OFAC sanctions list for the names of these individuals. And then we took a step out and we checked all of their associates as well. And then you document all of this for every transaction that you do. You have written agreements if you're giving direct financial assistance in certain regions that you have written agreements with your partners that are on the ground in terms of reporting and quarterly reporting on the financial assistance that you provide. And then you want to check also to see if there's a general license. So what happens is that the US might sanction a country, for example, Syria, but they might issue general licenses that say, okay, well, you can still transact things in that region within the confines of this general license, meaning humanitarian assistance that looks like X, Y, and Z can still be done. And you would just have to prove and show that that's something that you're doing, you're functioning within the license. And so I always tell people, if you're going to be working in sanctioned regions, that you either have a foreign grant policy in place that takes into account the entirety of the US sanctions regime, or you don't do the work, right? It's really one or the other, just because of the serious nature of the consequences of doing it without doing it correctly. So it's not saying that it's not possible to do, it just requires a certain level of due diligence on the part of an organization. And so, and organizations that don't undertake to do that due diligence and document all of their due diligence then open themselves up to civil and criminal liability. And so it becomes really important to make sure that is a policy that is in place. This next page is actually just a shot of a 990, a screenshot of a 990 that shows, oops, sorry about that, a screenshot of a 990 that shows that they actually ask whether you have a written conflict of interest policy in place and whether you have a whistleblower policy in place, whether you have a document retention and destruction policy in place, whether there's a process for determining executive compensation. These are actually all questions on the annual 990. So controls, like we talked about, they specifically discuss what types of policies are in place and how your organization is controlled by those policies. The IRS does want to see that that is in place and that they're being utilized. And the way you show that they're utilized is that you are actually documenting what you're doing as you're doing it. So in terms of a donor policy or conflict of interest policy or whistleblower policy, all of these things require internal documentation. Okay, so another aspect, we did put this section under controls, but because it tends to be dictated by policy, but there's another aspect of all of this, which is as an organization, what level of political involvement can you engage in? So we're kind of switching from actually hardcore policies that you implement to, generally speaking, if you're doing either advocacy, lobbying, or political work, having policies in place that dictate how that's done. And then those policies would be based on what kind of limitations the law places on you. So with regard to advocacy, an organization can advocate to its heart's content. You can advocate, there are really no limits placed on the amount of advocacy work that you can do. Advocacy work is specifically talking and teaching about a particular issue that has to do with your nonprofit mission or purpose. So, so for example, you can't advocate something that's outside of your stated purpose. So, you know, like for example, an environmental protection nonprofit entity of some kind couldn't lobby for gun rights legislation or gun control legislation, right? It's outside of the scope of its purpose. And so technically anything outside of the scope of a nonprofit's purpose, they can't actually expend their funds for that use. So you can advocate, a nonprofit can advocate as much as it wants. It just has to limit its advocacy to within the confines of its stated purpose. And so then if you take a step up from advocacy, which is basically educating the public and educating elected leaders about advocacy, about a particular subject matter or a particular policy, the next step beyond that is lobbying. So an organization is actually permitted to lobby. Nonprofits, 501c3s are allowed to lobby. They're just allowed to lobby in a limited way. So it can't be the primary purpose of what an organization does. And usually when I'm, you know, giving advice, I say don't spend more than 10% of your yearly expenditure on lobbying. That's more conservative. Some people will tell you 15, but just as a general rule, I say don't expend more than 10% of what you do on lobbying. So what is lobbying? There's two kinds of lobbying. There's direct lobbying, which is actually contacting a legislative official or their staff in support of or in opposition to a particular piece of legislation. That is direct lobbying, and as nonprofits, we're allowed to do that. Grassroots lobbying is then telling the public to contact the legislative officials in support or opposition to a piece of legislation. So, and nonprofits are allowed to do both. Now, if a nonprofit actually wants to engage in any type of significant amount of lobbying, the suggestion is that because the IRS, if you either fall into two categories. How does the IRS test whether you're lobbying more than you should? Well, if you're lobbying at all and you don't choose to actually tell the IRS, we are going to elect to being a type of 501c3 that actively elects to lobby by filing this form, they're going to put you in this category and say, okay, well, they didn't elect to lobby, but they are showing on their 990 that they're lobbying a little bit. We are going to independently, as the IRS, determine whether this qualifies as a substantial portion of what you do. If it does, in the minds of the individual looking at your application, amount to more than a substantial part of what you do, then you put your 501c3 status at risk. So lobbying without filling out the specific form and telling the IRS that you want to lobby, you're kind of leaving it up to them to determine whether they think you have exceeded the amount of lobbying you are allowed to do. But if you instead elect to lobby, you can actually fill out a form and just tell the IRS straight up that I'm taking the 501c3H or 501H election to be an organization that lobbies. And then what happens is that they tell you precisely how much lobbying you're allowed to do. So if you're an organization that wants to lobby and you're not a 501c4, but you're a 501c3, and you want to engage in any kind of significant amount of lobbying, this is the way to do it. It's just to elect to lobby so that you understand clearly the delineation between how much you can do and how much you can't. With regard to political intervention, it's just a complete no. I think this sometimes confuses people. At least I get a lot of questions from masjids asking, oh, candidates want to come and flyer outside of the masjid, and they don't realize that the answer is no, they can't. They can't flyer outside of the masjid. So political intervention is that during campaign season, no resources of a 501c3 can be used in support or opposition to a candidate for public office. So that means that is even, for example, you have your organization has a laptop and somebody is using that laptop to, actively support. That would be using an organization's resources, right? If you have a mailing list and one of the staff members wants to email everybody on the mailing list from their personal account, but they still use that mailing list saying, oh, support this candidate, that's considered using the resources of the 501c3 to support or oppose a candidate for public office, and it's not allowed. It's just strictly prohibited. What can an organization do during political campaign season is bipartisan stuff. It's have something go out to all your members that says, here's who's running, and you list everybody across the board and you list all of their policy points in a very neutral way. Get out to vote drives, things like that. Those are the types of activities that you can engage in. But when it comes to actually making statements or communications or anything that supports or opposes a candidate for public office, then you simply can't do it, and you can't use any of your organization's resources to do it. All right, so those are controls. Financial. So there's a lot in the financial section, and I'm not going to go over all of it, but what I want to go over generally is this idea that one of the most critical things for an organization is to use its funds only for its stated purpose. The IRS, this is what it's looking at on your 990, one of the things. And it's Sana talked about this. There's a fiduciary duty. The board has a fiduciary duty to use funds, donor funds, for the benefit of the programming of that organization. So to that end, you need an accounting system that's transparent. In organizations, a 501c3's funds are actually considered to be held in the public trust. So they don't actually belong to any person. They're held by the organization for the purpose of using it to benefit the public in whatever way the 501c3 is functioning to benefit the public. And so having an accounting system that understands that and takes that into account is really important. So the main goal of any, and there's a typo on the page, but the main goal of any accounting system is actually transparency. It's transparency so that the stakeholders and government regulators, if they do audit you, it's easy for them to see that you have been maintaining your books and records the way you're supposed to. And there's actually and the way you're supposed to has been defined. So we're not left in the dark and don't really know what to do. There are something called generally accepted accounting principles, which are GAAP accounting principles. And then there's an organization, which is actually a nonprofit, but it's been recognized by the federal government as an entity that they themselves use to determine what best practices are. So the organization is called FASB, FASB, the Financial Accounting Standards Board, and they actually tell you nonprofit accounting should look like this. So finding a CPA that understands what the GAAP principles are as they apply to nonprofits and then turns to FASB to determine what those are is on the right track. And for large organizations, this is not oh, maybe we should implement it. It's we have to implement it. For smaller organizations, there's software out there. But generally speaking, you want to create a system from the get-go that is transparent and reflects donor intent as well. So it's the board's legal duty to not only secure adequate resources to fulfill the nonprofit purpose, but to actually make sure that those accounting statements are accurate and that the board is regularly getting reports on those financial transactions, just the financial state of the organization itself. Okay, so I'm just going to skip to this last slide for purposes of time. Unrelated business income. This is something that gets a lot of organizations, unfortunately. Unrelated business income is basically income that has nothing to do with the stated purpose. So for example, a coffee shop in a masjid or selling swag, right, to raise money. Unfortunately, if those goods or that stuff doesn't have to do directly with the purpose of your organization, and the IRS has stated that selling like sweatshirts with your logo on it or hats with your logo on it doesn't actually qualify as furtherance of the stated purpose. And because of that, anything that exceeds $1,000 is technically considered taxable, and it's taxable at the corporate rate. I think of like 21%. And so you have to be careful of the type of business activities that you engage in and that you regularly carry on. So if you're only selling that swag, say like once or twice a year, that's not going to end up being considered taxable income. But if you do it regularly on an ongoing basis, then it becomes a business activity that's generating income, and it's because it's not substantially considered related to what you do. It's potentially taxable. Exceptions to that are rental income, sales exclusively to your members, if you have them, bingo, and then volunteer work. So unpaid volunteers are not considered, and the ones that provide you regularly with services without pay, it's not considered to be unrelated business income for you because you're getting a service for free. And so that is it. I know that was a ton of information Sana and I dumped on you. This is usually a 2-hour long presentation in which we go through with all organizations slowly, and they ask questions after each section, and we're working with them in a very tailored way after having seen all of their financials and all of their internal paperwork and meeting minutes. And so we tailor it. But I also think like this could be a semester long course at a university as well. There's so much information, but I hope you guys utilize MLFA's service and actually come in and take the time to do, especially if you see, oh, wait, we're not doing some of the things that we talked about today, then, you know, utilize our legal screening and let us train you and let us find the gaps and help you fill those things in. Any questions from anyone?
Thank you so much, Huma and Sana. And then if anybody has questions, to make sure to remember not to ask questions either about your own person or about anything identifying about your organization. So just keep it general and put in the chat again. If you do have specific questions, feel free to reach out to the MLFA team. But right now, if you want to unmute and you have a question, as long as it's a general kind of question. In regards to last week's recording, we're just waiting for MLFA. They're just doing a review of it. Again, just with the nature of the environment we live in today, we just want to make sure everything is able to be publicly posted. So some of the comments and stuff, we'll just make sure it's publicly recorded. And that's where MLFA is working on right now, Brother Yunus. Thank you for the question.
Brother Yunus, I expect to see an intake from you coming soon, right?
Sorry,
I said I expect to see an intake from you from your organization to MLFA coming soon, right?
inshallah.
Inshallah. Okay. This was like a presentation just for you. I think you were the only one. So I hope it was beneficial. Please do let us know if you have any questions right now, or I'll just put my email right here in the chat. And
Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. It was very, very educational. Thank you.
I just put both of our emails in the chat. So feel free to email us if you have any questions. We'd love to see the intake, but I was just joking. You don't have to if you don't want to.
Thank you.
And thank you again to AMCF for hosting us today. We of course feel like it's such an important topic. So if you have any other organizations that you think would benefit from a legal screening, a governance risk compliance legal screening, please forward them our information as well. Everything we do is pro bono, alhamdulillah, with the support of organizations like AMCF and donors and Muslim Women's Giving Circle. So alhamdulillah, we're able to provide these services pro bono. We actually have 4 departments. Did I mention that earlier? There's a criminal defense, immigration, civil rights / civil litigation, and then our nonprofit group. So alhamdulillah, you know, we're able to provide pro bono legal services under the MLFA umbrella. So happy to be here. I'll hand it back over to Lisa.
So thank you. We'll go ahead and stop recording. So thank you so much, Sana and Huma and the whole MLFA team.